So today I'm talking to Stephen Prue Henschke, the custodians of the great family-owned business in the Eden Valley, South Australia. Henschke, 1868 founded. They're the sixth generation. The seventh generation is also involved now. Three children of Stephen Prue, the custodians of some of the greatest vineyards in the country. Of course, the Hill of Grace is the most famous, but several other single vineyard wines they produce every year from the Eden Valley High Country, which I've got lined up here in front and beside me. This year is the 2021 release of the single vineyard wines, and I think the first probably question to ask Stephen Prue is, why are you releasing the 2021s when the 2020s haven't been released?
Well, it's a very simple answer. We had so little of the 2020s, literally so little, that when we went through the vineyard, there were 2 or 3 berries on a bunch, if we could find a bunch. Such a shocking season in terms of the flowering and set, such a little amount of wine that we put it into our museum and rare maturation area in the winery, and we'll release it to restaurants and things later on. But to release literally 1 barrel to the whole world is impossible.
Makes perfect sense. So they won't be released as normal releases. They will be given more time in the cellar and then released as museum wines, won't they?
The wine's actually quite good, both 19 and 20 are good. 20 is more restrained, so it's more perhaps in the 17 style of Hill of Grace, Madeline, etc. So it will certainly benefit from extra bottle age and is going to...
So the 21s, you're releasing these a year earlier than they would normally be released, and presumably going forward you're going to be releasing everything a year earlier than it used to be released. Is that correct?
Probably, and unless we have a season where we got double the amount and we can release 1 year after next, I don't know.
And I think you've said that the 21 is a great vintage. I think you've said it's the coolest summer since 2002 and also probably the greatest vintage since 2002. Is that how you see it, Stephen?
Prue's a girl who watches it in the vineyard.
Well, I guess it was a nicely balanced year, and trait is looking beautiful.
So going back to the 2020s, Prue, they're all dry-grown vineyards, as I understand it, probably more susceptible to periods of drought. Was the dryness a problem in 2020, or was it just fruit set?
It was actually frost. Frost was the killer. And then I guess we had excessive wind in the spring of 19. Yeah, it was really, as Steve said, trying to find a berry on a bunch. And it spread further across the vineyard. You usually have your frost pocket that you know of, and now it's seeming to spread right across. That wind we had in round flowering was disastrous.
Well, let's move on to the wines and talk about the wines a bit. Fantastic lineup of wines, I've got to say. I've tasted them already because we always like to taste our wines blind and in company with other wines to give them context. They all impressed me, but I thought the Cyril Henschke Cabernet was one of the best Cyrils I've ever seen. And I think it's nearly all Cabernet, isn't it? There's not much else in it this year.
Yeah, we have that vineyard with the 3 varieties, Cabernet, 25 rows of Cabernet, 5 rows of Cabernet Franc and 8 rows of Merlot. So we make individual wines from those components. Cabernet is the heart and the soul, and it's about whether or not the Cabernet Franc or the Merlot can add extra value in terms of quality in the wine. And in 2021, the maturity for the Cabernet was so beautiful. It really didn't need any extra boosting of a Merlot or Cabernet Franc to make it a better wine. So that's why we ended up how it is. And I guess, ironically, it has 1% Merlot, which in most people's minds, why would you even bother? But it's amazing on the tasting bench, and you'd know that from your experience, how when you have a wine and you just add a small portion of, say, Merlot, so 1%, 2%, 3%, up to 5% or so, and look at the wines, how amazing one small amount just makes it look that little, just glosses it a little bit more in terms of aromatics, and that's why it has 1% Merlot.
Well, that's the question I would have asked you if you hadn't already answered it. Most people would say 1%. Really, does that make any difference at all? But it is a beautiful wine. I guess Eden Valley and Barossa are both better for Shiraz than Cabernet in my view, in my experience. But when Cabernet hits the right spot, it's beautiful.
We're a bit lucky. I think Eden Valley, there's not much Cabernet grown, and this is a bit of an exception to the rule.
And I think we're on probably one of the best sites in Eden Valley for our Cabernet, and it's on a north-facing aspect, a gentle slope, and I think it's such a late variety in Eden Valley. I think it has a lot of hang time in terms of maturity. And in 2021, because we had a lovely mild, long autumn, just achieved beautiful fruit maturity, flavour maturity, tannin maturity in the wine.
Cyril, of course, was your dad, who was quite a visionary, wasn't he? He planted vines and made single vineyard wines at a time when there wasn't the interest in fine table wine that there is now. You know, he really believed he marched to the rhythm of his own drum a bit.
Probably, there was certainly an influence from, say, his uncle, who was Julius Henschke, the famous sculptor, sort of a Henschke family group in Adelaide that were quite, probably quite the social group, the artistic people who loved wine. And we also had the benefit of a lot of Italian, Greeks, Yugoslavian people who'd settled after the war and wanted to drink good quality wine. So, Cyril was ahead of the time by opening up a wine bar, when I was a kid in Ruddock Street. And I still think back and I can't believe it. I mean, I wouldn't open up a wine bar in Ruddock Street in Adelaide, but, the guts and determination to do that. He was obviously, trying to make a statement and get people, excited about beautiful red table wine.
Extraordinary. Well, I think it's a family of aesthetes, really, the Henschke family, because you're not only artists, you're musicians as well, and people who appreciate the finer things in life also appreciate good wine.
I think that's a good summary.
The wine that shocked me a little bit was the Wheelwright. It's the least expensive of the wines, I think. I just thought that wine had such a gorgeous fruit to it. It was really singing. Can you tell us a bit about the Wheelwright vineyard now?
The Wheelwright is, I guess, the baby in the lineup because it was only released for the first time in 2015 vintage for our 150th anniversary back in 2018. It's from a vineyard that Cyril planted back in the 60s, so our Eden Valley vineyard, which had been used in Caton for years and years and years. However, as a winemaker, you look at the different components as they're picked, they come in, we ferment them, and you become more and more stimulated by what you're seeing year after year. And it got to the point where we needed to value add, if that's the right word, have a single vineyard wine from those old plantings. And at 50 years of age, that's a significant period of time. Then it sort of lined up beautifully with Mount Edelstone being 100 years old and Hill of Grace being 150 years old. So we had these 50-year jumps and made so much common sense to bottle it as an individual wine, show the unique flavours and aromatics and tannins of the Eden Valley cooler site that we're in, and compare it to Mount Edelstone and Hill of Grace. And they're over 15 kilometres, three incredibly different wines from those three vineyards. And it's so bright, isn't it? It's red fruited and it's spicy and it's just delicious wine.
Now I'm going to move on to the next wine, which before we taste the Hill of Grace, we should taste the Hill of Roses. This is the young vines. How old do these vines going to have to be, Prue, before they allowed to get into Hill of Grace?
Well, I've been arguing the case that maybe now. And we're just looking for that lovely 5-spice scent that comes through in Hill of Grace. And as young vines, the Hill of Roses didn't have it. And it's gradually evolving in the fruit now. And they're actually, what are they, 36 years old, aren't they?
No, that's really 30, started in 1989. So,
for that vintage,
for the vintage.
Just over 30.
So I've got a feeling that when they tip over 50, you might say, you guys are old enough now, you can come out.
So I think I
might be a decision for the next generation, Huon.
I reckon we're just on the knocker of calling it appropriately aged enough. And it really, it's incredible to do this, to actually have enough time to verify what an old vine is. And I think we're just starting to see that characteristic come into these vines now.
Fair enough. I think there is too. Let's move on to the Mount Edelstone, because this is, I guess, the vineyard that really wasn't always a Henschke vineyard. It was planted by the Angus family, wasn't it? But you do own the vineyard now, I believe.
Yes.
Yes, that's a bit of history. So it was planted by Ronald Angus back in 1912, and Colin Angus, so Ronald's son Colin, who was my dad's contemporary really and a neighbour, offered Cyril the fruit in 1952. By 1956, thanks to his distributor in Sydney, Franz Castle, he encouraged Cyril to enter in the wine shows, and it blossomed as a first prizes in all the wine shows, and Cyril never looked back. And we still see Mount Edelson as a hero wine because that was the one that led Cyril to bottle the Motley Old Vineyard over at the church, which is the Hill of Grace Vineyard, as a single vineyard wine.
Yeah.
And give it the name Hill of Grace.
And this is the first single vineyard wine that he produced, isn't it, Mount Edelson? And it's quite a radical thing to do back then, I guess, when blending was more common, wasn't it?
Yeah, it garnered a huge amount of attention from people once it appeared in the show system and started winning awards. I guess one or two, whatever there was, of the wine writers back in those days, they really picked up on it and started talking about Cyril.
The quality of the tannins in that wine, in my memory, I have some remembrance of some Edelstons that had slightly more chunky tannins. This wine just has a lovely mellifluous flow to it. It's just one of the better Edelstons I've seen.
Certainly a fantastic vintage where that complete maturity really shows in the fruit, in the balance in the wine and the tannins.
Before we move on to the Hill of Grace, would you mind just having a look at turning around and explaining that painting behind you, because I think that painting's pretty interesting and it's a new addition, I think, to your gallery, isn't it?
Yes. So trying to sort of visualize the soils, I guess the theme of this year's release, and we're stepping down through, I guess, from north to south. So we're going from the beautiful red brown earths, the red clays from Hill of Grace, down through and across to Mount Edelson, and then down into Eden Valley where the soils are more a grey, sandy loam over prismatic clays. So it's just to give a visual effect of the different soil colours.
And this is by a local artist, I believe, Lisa somebody.
Yeah, I think she's tried to pull together that idea of the soil types quite well. And you can see it in different ways as well. You can also say, well, that's Eden Valley and that's Barossa Valley. You know, the sandy limes, the acidic soils of Eden Valley. And then you go down the hill into the Barossa Valley and the deep red clays over the sandy subsoil. And maybe the Western Ridge up the top there. You can see it in different ways.
Very good. Well, on that note, I think we should climax with the Hill of Grace here. You know, one always has to finish with the Hill of Grace, I think. And I suppose you could tell us about the composition of the wine, because I think the basis of it is what you call the grandfathers, which are, you know, well over the 125-year-old ancestor vine threshold. But there's also some of the younger vines on the Hill of Grace vineyard in it. How does it all work, Stephen? Is it different every year when you put it together?
Because it depends on how the blocks develop. But it was planted over time. So it was planted from 1860 through to about 1950. And really because of the different soil types and different terrain within that small vineyard, you know, we know historically where we're going to start picking, choosing the house block, and then the church blocks, and then we come around to the post office blocks, grandfathers, and the windmill blocks at the end. And it's really to do with depths of soil and structure and texture of the soil and the maturity of the fruit, just by tasting how we decide the picking program of that vineyard. And if we have enough, we can make individual lots of those wines. If it's a poor year and we don't have enough, it all ends up being picked together. But preferably, it's nice to see the differences of those different blocks and the difference in spice. Put together, it has this incredible exotic aroma of pie spice and anise and dark fruits. It's just a gorgeous wine.
That is indeed. And so, Prue, 160 odd years old, those grandfathers, how much longer can they live? Do they have an indefinite life?
If we look after them, I think the biggest issue is how we prune. We're doing a much better job these days, and I think those vines, although there's always a threat of hutiper and the dieback of the wood, we've certainly dealt with that to actually prune over the top of it, but now we're really pruning to maintain that age.
Yeah, well, the concentration of this wine is another level. I think it's just so much. I mean, concentration alone does not make a great wine, but that allied with the length of flavour, the volume of it, and the volume of flavour, the range of aromas and flavours is just extraordinary.
Yeah, there's a lovely level of intensity in the wine, and a part of that, I think, is the natural balance in the fruit. So when it comes in, at that sort of 13, 14 level with, almost perfect pH acid balance in the fruit. So it just goes through winemaking, the submerged cap fermentation into barrel and ends up going into bottle with literally no adjustment being made to the wine. It's extraordinary. I mean, it's just a picture in perfection, and it's all driven by what Prue's doing in vineyard. And the vine age, obviously.
It's an extraordinary story from so many angles. I've got to at least get a sensible sentence out to round this off and say thanks, Prue and Stephen Henschke, for being with us today. It's been a great chat. I always like catching up with you two and tasting, of course, the single vineyard collection, which are absolutely stunning this year. So all power to the Henschke family. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you, Huon. To your health. Cheers.